Hi, everyone. As was just mentioned, I'm from the Department of Biology at MIT. And because I've been developing and running MOOCs since 2013, so I've now accumulated over 100 MOOCs that I'm on my dashboard for edX Insights. So now I figured I should reflect on that experience. And what I wanted to focus on today is really the process is sort of in between what's talked about a lot. There's a lot of talk about the development side of making the MOOC, and there's a lot of talk about what happens, how many people complete when it's out, but what about during the run? And I feel like a lot of people sort of just make it and put it out there and do nothing. So focusing on what can you do in that time to make a difference. So why at MIT do we create MOOCs and focus on this? And the simplest answer is really just to come back to the mission statement of MIT, is to advance knowledge and educate students on STEM and other disciplines, and do this in a way that impacts the nation as well as the world. So to do that, I want to talk about 6 areas for impacting reach and engagement. So Ed mentioned reach in the morning. Instead of talking about reach of the platform, talking about reach within the courses and how do we get people to even know that MOOCs exist and that they're open and freely available to try, and finding those disciplines. Because although we're really aware of it, that's not necessarily the case everywhere. And so some of the things to focus on in that in-between time after you created the course, and then what can you do to impact reach and engagement. So I'm not going to have time to talk about a lot in detail, but this is a good conversation starting point that we can discuss more over the next coming days. So 1, enrollment. How do you get people to find the course and sign up? And so what impacts enrollment the most and what I'm finding? And there's other questions about enrollment. Should you have enrollment cutoff dates or not, and those sort of questions when you're designing a MOOC. Course emails, because as staff you have the option to send course emails, and not everyone does that, and so it doesn't matter. Is there any difference if you do or you don't? Settings of the course, so thinking about instructor-paced or and self-paced, and what about setting things like the verification deadline? The discussion forums, so how do you design things so the discussion forums are part of the intentional design? That's one topic here, but there's a lot of other aspects of the forum, like does the instructor being present in the forum matter? And real-time revision, so when the course is live, are there changes you can make to the course as it's happening, and what's fair to change during the live run? And I'll just mention a few things at the end about monitoring learners. So when you're in the live course, then what can you learn from just watching what people are doing? So first, just talking about a story about enrollment. So what actions impact enrollment? And one thing that we learned, right, and everyone across all platforms learned this, is, right, the pandemic influences enrollment. So there's a lot of external factors that can significantly change things, and this is work that Katie Blackwell did with us, is that, just looking, this is the very beginning of the paper, not the main point, but just looking at the enrollment rates. And you can see in 2020, enrollment rates in this Introduction to Biology MOOC dramatically increased just because of the external factor of the pandemic. And then that increased rate and continued in 2020, and then has died off since to be more of the pre-pandemic levels. So what about now in 2022, 2023, what are we seeing? So if I look across my course enrollment rates, so that most courses have a regular pattern of enrollment per day or enrollment per week, and then occasionally you see shifts, like I'm pointing out here on October 31st. So what is causing a big bump in enrollment, and what can we learn from that to do it more often? So in this case, what I'm finding is that MIT sends emails about MOOCs out, and this email went out to a group. In this case, it was a targeted group of about 1.4 million learners, of people who opened previous MIT Open Learning emails before. So not only it wasn't just these 2 courses that were featured, it was a variety of courses, others at MIT that were starting that month as well. But you can see here there's a noticeable increase in enrollment for those 2 courses because they're sending an email. And so one thing to think about is, enrollment, things like an email are basically free. There's staff time, but they're free. So again, on January 6th, MIT sent an email that included 3 courses here: genetics part 2, cell biology part 1, and part 3. And then if I look at the enrollment data for those courses, there's significant bumps in the enrollment. That email went out to a broader audience of like 4 million people, so there was a little bit of a better response. These cell biology courses are more upper level compared to our intro course, so there'd be less interest you would expect, but you still see an impact even in these upper level courses. And there was a nice control because for some reason they didn't include part 2 of the series of 3 cell biology courses. And you can see with the green line that part 2 just stayed constant, the constant daily enrollment rate, when that was not included in the email. So the genetics course is a new course this year, so that got its own email, and that was a targeted email to people who passed the introductory biology course before, so just a few thousand. But you can see with the genetics part 2, around January 6th, there's a peak, but then that peak just continues to rise through January 12th as well. So there is an additional bump even from a much smaller email list. And then if you go to compare that to part 1 of genetics here in the purple, that purple line did sort of maybe possibly benefit from these other courses in being advertised. Genetics part 1, it wasn't in those MIT emails, but at the same time I was also emailing course lists, so it just had a higher rate. But then I want to just highlight that there's a rate of enrollment per day depending on the course. So our introduction into biology course just always has a higher rate than any of the other courses. It's been around the longest. It's the most Google searchable. There's other places like Class Central that also include courses and have reach and impact too. So just having ways for people to find your course will impact that rate, and then where your course is being hosted will matter as well. So now thinking about the course emails that the staff send within the course, and in this case I'm talking about the ones that you can do through the instructor dashboard, and there are also ones that can be automatic, and for the last few years I've been using the automatic ones that can be sent out weekly, so these are in addition to those. And so is it worth it, and what does the research support? So this is showing a dashboard of the clicks from bit.ly links that I created. So over the years, tens of thousands of people are clicking on the links that I created. So is it worth creating a link to your About page and sharing that in places? Yes, because people are using them. And so I use those in emails, and I use those in our course websites, or in our course sites itself, because in the beginning of every course, we'll just say, here's our other courses that we have as well. So it's sort of, ways to help make it easier for people to find other courses. So in this case, you can see that there is a slightly larger peak, and this is not in the hundreds like the graphs I showed you before, but in the around 50, there's a peak sort of around March 2nd. And so what happened on March 2nd that might have caused the bump in people clicking registration links? In this case, it's an email that I sent. So in this course, this email went out to the Introduction to Biology MOOC, to the people who just finished. It was the end of that run. And just telling them, go find another one of our courses and register again. And then people did respond to those courses, because the courses I just showed in the previous slide that had a peak on March 2nd were the ones that I highlighted in that email. So it's not hundreds, but it definitely makes a difference of just telling people you have other courses they can register in. In these course emails too, I also, in general, will have key highlights about the course or deadlines, but right now I'm just focusing on the enrollment. So engagement is a little bit harder to read now, especially because I'm using the automated emails, but my sense is, yes, when I send an email out, the engagement will go up. But I just wanted to show this, that if you look at edX Insights, the active learners with the blue line will fluctuate week to week, and some of those may be caused by the emails that go out. There sometimes can be a bump in problems tried or videos watched, but it's definitely the most obvious in just the people who click into the course. And I want to highlight that the research does support that instructor emails matter. And it is mixed, so that's why there's not a magic intervention that's really talked about and implemented in all these platforms like Anant mentioned this morning, because the research is really hard to parse out. There's sometimes it makes a difference, or sometimes it doesn't make a difference, and it could be course dependent. But this is one example that came out last year of just finding that they sent a weekly email from the instructor, and it was in this supportive tone of like, keep trying, you can do it. And it had they had a control group that didn't get those emails, and then they did see an immediate impact as well as completion impact when they were looking at that intervention. So now just shifting gears to thinking about settings. So I'm going to just talk about a study that we did looking at instructor-paced versus self-paced. And I did this work with Monica Avello and some other people at MIT, but what I want to focus on today is just the part with the biology courses. And so looking at a period of time from 2014 to 2019, we had several runs of the same course. And in 2 of those runs, we ran it as self-paced, and the other times it was instructor-paced, meaning there were due dates for the course materials being released and deadlines. So when we looked at, we wanted to know, does it matter? And so from our sense was in self-paced runs, it was kind of more dead, although the best practice advice is make everything self-paced so people have more flexibility and they can complete more. And so is that true? And really it's not true. Like by a percentage, if you look at percent, we found across these runs that when you had the self-paced mode in the years 16 and 17 here, that the overall percent of people who verified or completed or explored, which means they clicked into half of the chapters, were lower than when you had instructor-paced, where you had the regular due dates. And so this is older. And I have to also say that there's a caveat of this of as the platform changes, that impacts these numbers as well. So things like having the verification reminder in so many places now on edX.org is it would impact verification numbers and those sort of things. And the external factor like the pandemic would impact these numbers that we studied in the other papers. So I think just keeping that in mind, but trying to control for that as much as possible, this is what we found. You may think that the learners, when it's self-paced, would use more of the days. And we do see that when it's self-paced, that they're using more of the range of days to finish or just complete something. And so this is just people who submitted a problem. It's in a greater number of days that they're submitting problems. But what people may argue is that, self-paced, they're going to use more of the time to finish, but really it looks like the people are taking advantage of it to finish faster. So the people who want to finish quick and fast, then we're seeing it actually is a little bit slightly lower in these runs for self-paced in the total number of days that they use to complete. So it's interesting, maybe not what exactly was expected. But overall, in summary for this part is just that, self-paced, despite thought to increasing engagement metrics, we did not see that. It was lower for exploring and completing and verifying and not really making a difference when it came to participating, which is just clicking in the course in general. The posting on the forum and attempting a problem and watching a video, we also looked at individually in the paper that I'm not showing here, and we did not see an increase in those as well. And it did not increase the activity of completers, that they were submitting problems in a greater number of days, but overall attempted fewer problems on a per day average, those sort of metrics. So you can see more about that story with that link that is there as well. So another setting question is just, does the verification deadline matter that you can do it on edX.org? And what I generally want to show is just, now we have a lot of self-paced courses and instructor-paced courses, and the instructor-paced, when there is a deadline and then there's due dates for assignments, at some point in the course there is a drop-off then in the daily engagement, weekly engagement. So here, around February 18th is the point where that drop-off happens because there's a verification deadline around there. And then as the course goes on, it's really like the people who have either verified or just are really committed to completing it that are continuing on. So by the end of the course, it's much fewer who are active. And that looks different than when it's a self-paced course. It's more consistent and going across the time period. And so the thing about the data shown here is that you don't know, are these new people coming in every week because it's self-paced and you can just restart? Is it the same? So it's not as clear cut as just there's more people, and that's why we did the study in the previous slides for showing percentages versus just raw numbers that are harder to parse. But it definitely could make a difference, and that's why our overall message in the other paper was just everyone should consider the factors for their course and the staff they have and how they want to manage things for deciding whether it should be self-paced or instructor-paced. Discussion forums. So do the instructors and peers make a difference in responding and posting? And there's a lot of literature that's done on this subject. We didn't do any specific studies ourselves, but you may see, if you want to search for terms like the teacher presence and those sort of factors and mattering in MOOCs. And one of the studies recently was just talking about the effects of instructor participation in the forums, looking at posting an original post versus replying. And they found that posting mattered more than the replying, but both had impacts on engagement. And that there was also a dependency on the number of people who were in the course. So, just showing that there's factors that influence the results. And so that's one of the, recent pieces that you could take a look at in more detail, but in general, then there is an impact that having the staff active on the forum matters. So real-time revision. So how can you take learner feedback in, past the point of the course running, past the point of beta testers that maybe completed the course before the course was live. So here's some examples from what I would say is one of the tools that you can use for real-time revision, but probably the easiest and most specific is just using the discussion forum. So here's a case of just an error in an image where just it was just an orientation thing that had to be changed in the image, and then we could respond and fix the image in real time. And that in this case wouldn't matter for the graded question or some other factor, so you just replace it as soon as someone brought it up. Another question here or comment was just there was no show answer detailed explanation for one of the questions. We typically write that for all of our questions, all hundreds that are in each course. And in this case, we didn't because it was open-ended and there are many answers that could be possible, but I just went in and then made an example answer because obviously some people are looking for something there. So just going in and you can add it in real time. Another thing that came up that I thought was interesting is that someone was posting about adding the notes feature. And it's curious because I didn't really know if anybody was using it. So I saw that it's available. I added it to some random run somewhere. And then somebody was asking for it. And so once they asked for it, then I just added it in all the courses across the board so that it's there for the number of people who do use it. But I don't know how popular it is or how many actually use it. But apparently there's someone at least. So those are just ways to immediately react to what learners are doing within the course run. And then the last part is just thinking about monitoring learners during the run. And so there's several ways I do this, but I didn't really want to show pictures of it, because one way is just looking at the gradebook. And so going through the gradebook and seeing what the scores are, you can tell, like, okay, are things easy or hard in general? You can look at, in a self-paced course, has anyone finished the first week you have it open? And then that tells, like, okay, everything has been completed. So there's nothing major that is a problem in the course. They didn't say anything. Also, just to gauge how easy or hard it is, and then looking at the total number of people who are passing as time goes on. And you can do all that from just looking through the gradebook and sorting it in different ways. And you can think about learner interactions as well through edX Insights. So if you go to the Insights page, you can look at, on a specific assignments, on specific problems, what the percent correct and incorrect are, and then looking at that balance and finding, are there places where, you know, it's just lower, where there's they're getting stuck more. There's ways you could immediately respond to that, you know, going to the page and seeing if there's something wrong there. But there's ways to think about those questions, you know, for probably revision before the next run, because it would be most fair if it's some graded content to change those sort of things before the next run. Also that sort of insight pattern, especially when questions get difficult, you may also see then the numbers drop, because that's like a point where people quit. So that could also be informative to, like, find those areas to revise maybe next time, or add other supporting materials in the moment to try to keep people going and not giving up at a certain point in the course. All right, so the key takeaways, just think about from this message, is just that the MOOCs are not all the same. A lot of times the research tries to sound like, okay, there's one conclusion that will apply to all MOOCs, but every course is different. The content matters, who's teaching matters. There's a lot of factors, the size, that will impact the results. So then it's harder to figure out what to do. Make, you know, the decisions for your course considering all these nuances, and factor those in. And use email strategically, so you don't want to bombard people and, you know, have it be annoying, but figure out what are effective ways, and then what do you put in that email that will help the learners find what they need to find, versus just be, you know, a lot of information that they don't need that could be distracting. And for people who are the instructors, the staff, is just be present in the forum and through email or other ways, you know, if there are other even live sessions that you want to run. All right, and so like the general message, right, is that your decisions and actions do impact the engagement. So it's not helpless, like you can do things in the moment to get people back into the course and active. And so with that, I just want to leave some time for questions. So that's my information if you want to talk to me more. Darcy Gordon is here, and Caitlin, they work on the MOOCs with me now. Our website's on the bottom, the web.mit.edu, MITx bio. There's links to all of our research papers there. I also wanted to highlight that one of the co-hosts for Learning with MOOCs with Jessica Sandlin, who's over there. And so if you want to come back to MIT in October, then please do. And if you want to talk to us about how to participate in Learning with MOOCs, let us know. The call for papers is open. And with that, I think we can leave time for questions.
Okay, that was fantastic. Just wondering, for instructor-paced versus self-paced, do you find that one type makes clear what actions and decisions you and your staff, what's most useful for you and your staff to do? I could imagine with self-paced, either trends get flattened out into noise or they become clearer because it's less synchronous.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why for some of the courses we decide to just eventually have it be self-paced. We may do instructor-paced at first, and then eventually lead to self-paced. But the instructor-paced takes more action because in instructor-paced, I usually send weekly emails to remind them a due date is coming when there's a real hard due date. And that has gotten very confusing in the last few years because of the feature of the artificial deadlines that happen in self-paced courses. And so people see due dates and it's not a real due date, and it's not clear what those are. And so in some ways that will help because people are motivated by due dates. That's why we see the results that we see in that research on instructor-paced versus self-paced. There's external motivation to complete when there is a due date. In some ways it makes it more confusing because the message from the staff, maybe there's no deadlines, it's self-paced, go the way you want, but then they're like, well, why do I have this due date and I missed it, and like it doesn't matter, just click extend, right? So it does like impact what we want to do. It does impact the action on the discussion forum. There's just more action there tends to be if something is instructor-paced, and there's more urgency on our side to respond to it because there is a due date, so you want to make sure you answer their question or address their concern before the due date, because if you wait too long, then it's not relevant anymore. So we hope for communities to be active on the discussion forums, but those days have died down from in the past where there were just random learners who spent hours and hours talking to others on the forums, and I think there's a lot of questions being asked on the forum, but they expect more like a staff response and waiting for that.
Thank you for a very insightful presentation. My question is the following. Can you shed light or elaborate on the comparison between, A, do all of the edX courses have their own discussion forums? And then B, is there an engagement, statistical difference between engagements with classes just discussion forums without an instructor versus where the instructors are very active on the discussion forums? So in other words, can the students just sort of carry on their learning by discussing amongst themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, the first part is just, does every course have a forum? Ideally, yes. I think technically you can turn it off, but I think they really don't want that. So I would not recommend it either. That you should have the discussion forum active, and you don't have to necessarily use like the edX forum. There's ways you can like connect to Piazza or other types of forums too. So having a way for everyone to post questions, concerns, other comments is useful, and then having that way to be visible to everybody. And because even though small numbers are posting to forums, there's a lot of lurkers and a lot of people who just read forums, right? And so then on the other side, in our courses, we do have some learners who respond. We don't have the humanities types of course discussions set up in our courses. Sometimes we do. We'll say something that's more open-ended, like, in this unit, what were you puzzled by? What do you want to learn more about? Something more open-ended. But there's other, humanities courses would have a prompt where they're, supposed to go to the forum to discuss and debate something. So in those cases, it will be a lot of learner interaction and learner post. And I think, yeah, you can have courses that will run with the community. I think it helps to always have the staff watching and helping to intervene or prompt people to talk more. I think you still have to watch the forums for the spam that happens. It's not that often, but there's times that sort of stuff happens too. And I think it's just a shame because people forget about the forum and then they put the course as live, and then if you go around searching through edX, there's a number of forums that are dead. There's a lot of students saying, hi, I'm here, and then nobody responding.
In your self-paced courses, and I'm assuming they're asynchronous?
Yeah, you can start it at any point. In general, I try to have them open for now like 6 months and then restart the community versus having it open for a very, very long time.
How do you challenge mastery? What tools do you use?
Yep. So if we want to talk about assessment, then the way we assess learning in the most ideal situation is with a competency exam that we use in our introductory biology course. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And how frequently do you do that with these adult learners?
Yeah. So there's another type of mode is what I prefer, and it's not a technical mode in edX, but it's a hybrid mode of self-paced and instructor-paced. And so it's shown as instructor-paced, but the reality is we have all of the course materials opened as self-paced for learning. And then we have a 1 week period where there's a competency exam. And in that competency exam, there's not feedback, there's not any correctness shown. There's a lot of different tools and setup around how that exam is run, so that's not the best way to learn. But everything else is set up with as much feedback as possible, open for discussion, so that people can learn. And we prefer that model for those type of large courses, so that in that exam, we also designed it based on the learning objectives so that we can have as much coverage as possible throughout the entire course. And then it is a way to sort of control for the integrity of the certificate, but also allow as much as possible to be flexible and self-paced. And then we run that one 3 times a year because it's for the intro bio course that we have a large number of people taking it. So every 4 months, that course is restarted, and the last week of the run is when the exam is run. Online for the MOOC, but in person at MIT.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I just had a couple questions. So one of the things that I get asked a lot by clients is, how do you evaluate learner engagement? Like, is it just the login? Is it interacting with some component? So I would love to hear how you guys evaluate that. And then kind of going back to your email examples, have you done any research or come across any research on the effectiveness of sending like nudging emails that are based upon the learning engagement criteria?
Yep, so the first part of what engagement is, I think, we looked at participation and explored and the completing and the verified, and I think like at least within a community at MIT, we try not to focus as much on who completes because MOOCs are open so that people can just jump in and learn what you can learn. So then if you take that out as the main factor, what we care about more is really like people trying problems ideally, like there's, some sort of application, some sort of interaction, even if it's a forum, going and doing something. And there's a whole body of research about the doer effect, people that do are learning, right? And so, but we also don't mind if people are watching it like Netflix and just YouTube and just going through all the videos, right? So there is that factor of video watching that is passive, but at least they're, if they're doing that for fun, that's fine too. And hopefully they're getting something out of it and maybe they'll be inspired to learn more. So I think the video watching and the problems matter most to us. There is just, it's really hard, I think, in the edX data that if you look at participation, like, oh, there's something, but that really is like that homepage it could be, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean they're even clicking on any course content. So I think it has to be more than just that. But I mean, if you're just looking at impact on are people using this email to find the about page or register, you can use those very beginning metrics, but really want them to do something to matter within the course. And then the other part about the nudging, there's another group at MIT within the supply chain courses and MicroMasters, and they've done some studies on the nudging as well and trying to figure out, but really like their main conclusion was that it was more impactful to change the content of the course, figure out places where people were getting stuck and trying to get them unstuck more than nudging. And that's why I think, this whole, why don't we have a simple feature that's nudging people? There's not necessarily a clear answer or a really dramatic effect. So even the paper I mentioned where another group sent emails and saw an impact, they mentioned how the impact was small. It was only 3.5% or something. But they're saying in the context of MOOCs, that could be many people when you have thousands enrolled. But also, like, isn't that better than nothing? Or isn't it better to have people keep going and be motivated by something? So there's, those small things you can be doing, and it may be a small impact, and that might be why you don't notice it as much too. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Very specific question. Do you have a sense of what kind of rate of return people should expect for on emails in terms of like registrations per 1,000 emails or something, some metric like that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think at MIT they did that calculation and weren't aware of the impact until I showed them these data, like that there is this. I think it really depends on what your email list is, right? Because we have people in this list it's because of people that have signed up for other MIT MOOCs. And so I think there is something about MIT courses, right, that will attract them back to other MIT courses. They realize like, oh, I like this and I'm coming, I'll do other MIT courses. And so that probably impacts things too. But it really depends on the open rate, and they target it in different ways. So I don't think there's anything specific or magic about it right now, but you could do those studies. And I think it just shows too, like, you should look at these numbers to like evaluate, like, if I'm sending these emails, do they even matter? And sometimes people aren't thinking about that side of it. Also, I want to note that if anyone from 2U is here, nobody really includes me of my courses in the 2U emails, but emails matter, so we can broaden the disciplines focused to those emails more than just data science, so just putting that out there.
I admit I'm a little bit of a plant here.
Yeah.
I'm part of Mary Ellen's group. But I just would be interested to hear you share, after 100 runs, what are you looking forward in the next 100?
I don't know, retiring or something, but yeah, I mean, I think it was exciting to see the evolution from the last 10 years, because when it started, I think no one now really understands the excitement and the uncertainty that came with it, and how many naysayers thought it would all be gone in 5 years. So I think that is great to see that it's stronger than ever now after 10 years than before. And I think hopefully in the next 10 years we can do even more with what we have, and then starting to tackle the harder problems that go beyond just getting people into these courses and how to make a course, and those sort of things we figured out now, and that we're in the tens of thousands. But how do we impact people in more ways than what we are now, and reach more people? And also then we'll see what AI does, like Anat says.
Any final questions before we wrap up?
You mentioned student tracking, like course on course, and like doing targeting with messaging. Do you have a specific tool that you use to track?
I mean,
courses?
Like the tracking I was showing was just using edX insights, or tracking with using bit.ly links, like the links you create yourself. And so you can see some noise there, response. And with more sophisticated tools, you can actually see like how many people register, the marketing people that, that you can actually track everything, but I'm not using those sophisticated tools. But yeah, there's nothing, just simple things that are free and easy and available to use quickly. But yeah, thank you everyone for asking so many questions. I was hoping this would generate a lot of conversation and just thought, and it's like very simple things, so I debated whether to should I talk about this or not, but then, it's good to reflect on the basic things too, and try to think about what we learned during this time.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Wittrope.